Sunny skies for the next few days. So I don't know, maybe hopefully throughout your whole district here, Senator, which is interesting, Senator Walczyk.
It is.
All right. And I want to make sure.
Mark Walczyk. Right?
Yes, Mark Walczyk. Yes.
That's it.
I want to make sure.
Wow, not bad, gentlemen. Thanks very much. You know how to make a Polish man feel welcome.
Well, welcome. Hopefully you are welcome. Welcome in the studio. So you are the senator. You represent the 49th district. And this is our first time meeting you, having you in studio, but you do represent a portion of our listening area. So, Senator, welcome.
I appreciate it. Have almost all of Herkimer County except 3 proud towns in the south that belong to Senator Griffo. He has the honor of still representing the towns of Winfield, Lynchfield, and Columbia.
So I've
got the rest of the county.
How many years have you been doing that now?
2 terms in the state assembly. I just started in the state senate, and after the redistricting of last year, I ended up with the largest Senate district in the state of New York,
which Rocco knows fairly well.
Yeah.
So I used to work for Senator Griffo, and we had to go all the way up to Messina and the Canadian border up there, and so it's nice. His district is much nicer now, but now you got the big district,
and it was great. So when I served in the state assembly, I'm from Watertown, New York. When I served in the assembly, I represented a district that stretched up to Messina and also had Potsdam, and those were the 2 towns that I overlapped with Senator Griffo.
Oh, okay.
So we worked on issues up there. He got me oriented and kind of took me under his wing, especially in Messina. Was very helpful, and learned a lot from Senator Griffo. Still do every time I talk to him.
Yeah. So if you were looking at a map of New York State and you were kind of looking down on Utica, your district is
nobody looks down on Utica.
You know what I mean? I mean focused on Utica, I guess. You kind of have this diagonal left sliver of the state in a sense, right? It's coming down from that top left corner of the border and going down into the Herkimer border area.
Yeah,
right?
the Canadian border, Thousand Islands, Adirondack, Mohawk
Jefferson,
Valley, Central
Lewis,
New York.
Yes,
Oswego
County,
and Frankfort. You have all those.
I do.
All those towns are all yours.
Yep.
Dolgeville.
And then straight out to Johnstown, Gloversville, up into the Adirondacks, from Indian Lake to Blue Mountain Lake, Inlet, Old Forge, and then straight up through Gouverneur to Ogdensburg, down the Seaway, all of Jefferson County, so Watertown, and then back down into Oswego County, Mexico Parish, Pulaski.
So what are
quite a stretch.
I know. I mean, when you look at statewide issues, there's taxes and regulations and things like that. That I think every area, every district has broad opinions on those issues. But as far as your district and being a new senator to that district, what are the unique issues that you've realized are very important to this broad district? And because I think all of us would agree, you probably don't know what's going on in a lot of those communities like we might hear closer to Utica. So what are the issues that are really coming to the surface in some of those communities?
Yeah, one challenge, and you can appreciate this, Rocco, having worked for a senator with a really large district. It's 100 towns, 45 villages, 7 counties, and 5 cities. So it's very local government focused. And especially in a state like New York that tends to draw power to the executive and power to the state, really important to advocate for the issues that are local to those local governments. So understanding each one of those issues. It's one of the reasons that I tied for the most bills passed in the Republican conference, and I think was part of the reason that I was named by the Young Republican Senator of the Year, which I'm really proud of. But part of the reason is that so many local governments are requesting so many things across the district, and I really have to represent their interests.
Mark, we don't know you. Can you just give us a brief biography, where you grew up, where you went to school, your prior career before you did this?
Sure, yeah. Grew up in Brewerton, fishing on Oneida Lake. Graduated from Central Square, so just north of Syracuse. And my senior year at the University at Albany, took an internship in the New York State Senate, where I got to sit on the bench behind none other than Senator Joseph Griffo. And really enjoyed the internship, so much so that I got a job out of it. So I worked for a senator out of the southern tier, out of Binghamton, and then had an opportunity to volunteer for a campaign in the North Country, and ended up working for Senator Patty Ritchie, who served Jefferson, St. Lawrence, and Oswego counties back then. Had the opportunity to run for state assembly a few years back, beat a 10-year incumbent. That was a seat that was held by Democrats for 16 years. So we took that seat back. And then when redistricting happened, Senator Ritchie was also retiring, so I ran for the open seat and now represent the largest district in the state of New York.
Where's your home, Mark?
Home is in Watertown.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I also on the weekends I serve as an Army reservist. So I joined the Army Reserve quite a while back. 11 years into that career now. And so I'm a captain on the weekends.
And how just because I have no clue guessing looking at you, how old are you? What's your age?
38.
38. So as a young man in his 30s, when you, again, I think it's fair to say Senator Griffo is the next generation there. Maybe he's close to 30s. But when you look
he can run with the young guns.
I know. He can put up a good fight, as we all know. But when you're looking at Albany and you've been dealing with politics at different levels, as a younger generation viewing it, what do you see as kind of, is there anything you identify as, here's the problem in government, or here's where government is broken? Because I think it's going to be like your generation and the next younger generation that's coming in, that they better have creative ways to try to fix what's going on with our government, because nothing seems to be working right now.
Okay, so great question. And here I think is the biggest problem, and it's a boring answer, and that's why this continues to be a problem. In the United States of America, we seem to focus on the easy button, and that's who is going to run for president every 4 years, and we focus solely on presidential politics. Everything else by interest falls by the wayside as you go down the ballot. But the government that is most important to you and should be most important to you is the one that lives closest to you. So your local village government or your local town government is the one that actually should have the most impact on your life. You should be interested in those local elections. And the federal government should resist taking on additional responsibility and additional powers to solve some of your problems at the local level. The same thing is true at the state. They should be pushing that responsibility and power back down onto the local government that can solve the problems for each community by their own interest. So I think that is by and large the biggest problem.
To know to stay in your lane and not try to solve every issue at federal levels, local issues, that the state has to make it easiest for those municipalities to deal with their issues.
Absolutely.
Right?
And not to be historic and academic about it, but if you look at the Articles of Confederation, we realize that, all right, the federal government actually needs a little bit more power and needs some guardrails on this thing. And that's how we drew up the Constitution, to say, all right, well, this is the limited scope of the federal government, and this is the lane that they should stay in. They've far expanded that scope, and we can blame those that draw power to themselves, and we can also look in the mirror and say, as voters, are we expecting too much of the President of the United States, the federal government in general? Same with the state level. We should expect these things from our local governments and have each one of those sort of different layers of government responsible for what makes sense.
Mark,
not just mandates, yeah.
This is my problem with government today. And I'll start out on the national level. During the COVID pandemic, money was thrown all over the place to everyone, giving people money, and now people are figuring out what to do with it, and cause this huge inflation that we have. On the state level, what troubles me is the paradox of grants. If every politician who comes back home to cite his or her accomplishments, this is how much money I brought to you in grant money. I got more grant money than the other senator or than the other assembly person. And everybody wants to talk about how much grant money they got. The paradox of that is it's good for the individual community, but it's bad for the whole state when all we're doing is giving away more taxpayer dollars. And the reaction of the taxpayers is to go to Florida or South Carolina or someplace where they don't have the high taxes. Because if you have all these grant programs, somebody pays for it. And it's paid for by the taxpayers. And it's a myth to think that only the high earners pay the taxes. You pay it when you ride the thruway, and they raise the tax on the thruway. When they raise the cost of recording a deed, when they raise every single fee there is, and they say, we didn't raise taxes. Great, but you're raising everything else that we pay to government. So the question I'd like you to address is this. Is there anything, in your opinion, that can be done to curb the appetite that every single politician seems to have for spending taxpayer dollars by giving grants away for any purpose they can think of, because that's how you get votes?
Well, first, Mark, I want to say I wholeheartedly agree with your assessment, and I think I would go even further. Not just because these are taxpayer dollars and you're bringing them home, and you often see politicians take credit for bringing home the bacon, so to speak, and we can criticize pork barrel spending. But think about the relationship. When I talked about, I represent 100 towns, 45 villages, 5 cities, 7 counties. Imagine my relationship with each one of those governmental officials if they know there's money on the table. They may be a little bit less honest or a little bit less aggressive about other issues that they may have with their state government, other things that they should be advocating for, maybe even powers and authorities that should be in their particular layer of government, because their hand is out at the same time asking for some of that grant money. So it perverts the relationship at the same time. And you saw this, probably the best example would be with the Cuomo administration. Cuomo would show up to a town and everyone would smile for the photo, and you know what they were saying behind his back after he left the room. But they didn't want to be honest with him to his face about the problems that he was causing for their local government. They would smile and do the handshakes
and
because they knew, downtown revitalization initiative or the next economic development consolidated funding application is going out the door. We have a lot of money that we're asking for right now, so we have to be nice. We shouldn't be honest. And that's a real problem when you consider about the function of government. So I wholeheartely agree.
Mm-hmm. And Senator, just going back, you mentioned some of those towns, those villages that you represent, and I guess just more topical in a sense of what's happening in the news. We just talked to Jeff Lynch, who was the security guard at the Proctor football game. He was shot in the back of the head and recovering with, I think, some really great spirits. But this isn't something new, gun violence or just violence in general, crime throughout our state. And recently in a town that you represent, Johnstown, there was a state police and officer involved shooting where they responded, I believe, to a home for an emergency call. The gentleman approached those officers, I think striking one of them with a hammer, and he was shot and I think ultimately killed. What are your thoughts on just crime and what is happening in our state? We talk about bail reform issues. We talk about raise the age issues. I know you were against some of the recent measures to add an extra layer of checks and balances, I guess, if you will, where the state police now will be involved in the background check system and the ammo system here, where a new fee is added to that. So what are your thoughts on just in general how we're approaching crime and what law enforcement is dealing with here in our state?
Well, I'll start on the last part first. Protecting our Bill of Rights and our Constitution is critically important.
Yeah.
When you do a job like this, I'm honored to be a state senator. On day one, before you get to start the job, you raise your right hand and you swear to uphold the Constitution. That includes the Bill of Rights. It's amazing how many, and I realize this working in Albany, how many get elected to that position, stand in the same chamber as everybody else, raise their right hand and swear to uphold the Constitution, and have a disdain for things like the Bill of Rights. When it comes to First Amendment rights, when it comes to Second Amendment rights, they really see it as in opposition to their political goals. Which is incredible. Mm-hmm.
So it's the first thing you do as an elected official, as you were pointing out. You agree to, and you are going to do your best as an elected official to uphold the Constitution and represent the New Yorkers the best way you can, right?
Yeah, and listen, my oath of enlistment to the United States Army is something that I take very seriously. The oath of enlistment that I take, or the oath of office that I take to be a New York State Senator, take it very seriously. So when I see the Concealed Carry Improvement Act, the CCIA, directly an affront to Second Amendment rights, the reason that was passed was that the Supreme Court of the United States told New York State, your laws are unconstitutional. You're violating the Second Amendment. And so New York State's immediate political reaction is to scurry to Albany and pass quickly a bill that is even more unconstitutional than the one that the Supreme Court slapped down. Mm-hmm. And then more things like this. So a surcharge on ammo that is just an extra hurdle by everyone who exercises their constitutional
And you introduced, I think, some legislation or a bill to try to repeal that, right?
Yeah, Senator Griffo actually has the full repealer of the CCIA, which I'm a co-sponsor of.
Gotcha.
And I introduced a smaller and, kind of understand, and this is probably out of the Senator Griffo schoolhouse. You work within, you be a little bit politically pragmatic. You work within the scope that you have. So right now, Democrats are in charge. So we look for a little bit of compromise or to make it a little bit better. So
You're being realistic, right?
Yeah, we want the full CCIA, which is unconstitutional, repealed. But also I've introduced a bill that would just make sure that the state is covering those surcharges on ammo and on firearms purchases to make it a little bit better so that we're at least not slapped in the face on top of getting our Second Amendment.
So the repeal is for the surcharge?
Just for the surcharge.
Gotcha.
So do you, and this was a frustration that I know Senator Griffo has had. There was a time where he was in the majority, and then once it shifted to the Democratic majority in the past few years, it became very frustrating, I think, for a lot of the Republicans, especially upstate, where there is a big Republican voice that sometimes feels they're not listened to. They have no voice in Albany, and that could be very frustrating. So do you find when you like you said, you have to be realistic. You have to work with the majority, so you find a way to try to maybe compromise to find something that will be realistic there to get their support. Having said that, do you feel that do you get the impression that there are Democrats that really do have the appetite and good faith to want to try to work with Republicans, or is that bipartisanship so toxic right now at all levels of government that even with compromises that are reasonable, they don't want to play?
Yeah, the sad thing I would say, especially in the Senate, is that those members would be the exception and not the rule. Generally, it's still a very politically charged chamber. They have a supermajority. The Democrats have a supermajority in the state Senate, and they bully it around. One thing that you would probably notice differently, Rocco, is that when the Republicans were in the majority in the New York State Senate, if you sat down, so the majority means the members are generally going to be chairs of committees that have statewide impact on that area of policy across New York State, right? The chairs of the committees, I found, and their staffs that ran those committees when the Republicans were in charge, took that job very seriously. They considered not just their own district, not just the next political headline, they considered the statewide impact of whatever that policy was. So you could have an upstate Republican, very deeply understanding how the MTA is run and how the Long Island Railroad is run. These aren't things that are really of interest to their district, but they saw the statewide impact and they took that chairmanship seriously. You do not see that across the board with the Democrats. And that is probably one of the most disappointing things, I would say, in the way that they're choosing to run the state Senate right now, is the chairs really do not take their job seriously as a statewide policymaker. So as a result, when it was Cuomo in charge, he just ran them right over. Currently, Kathy Hochul is a little bit weaker, let's say, in the policy that she puts forward, and the Assembly is very strong. So the Assembly tends to, and they're very staff-driven, not very elected member-driven. So they tend to, now you have unelected staff members in the New York State Assembly, many of them that have been there longer than elected members. They tend to be the drivers of policy across New York State. They're all very New York City focused and have been in that Albany bubble for a long time. So all of this political inside to say, when you see policy come out of Albany right now, that's why it doesn't make sense.
It's hard to get it maybe north of or past Albany if you're coming up the thruway, right?
Mark, I'd like to ask you about a specific issue. There's a lot of specific issues I'd like to ask you about. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm just asking about this one. We had a pharmacist on a week or so ago, and he told us that he can give the flu shot, but he has to have a prescription from a doctor. So he has to pay a doctor to write a blank prescription for people he has never seen, never met, doesn't know who they are, but he writes a prescription so that this pharmacy can give the flu shot. It makes zero sense to anybody. The pharmacy said all it does is cost them money, and it costs people money who have to buy these things. Whoever's paying for them, you have to build that cost in. And there appears to be no purpose for this. When you say a prescription is supposed to mean that a doctor looks at the patient and says, this is appropriate for you, and you can't just go on buy it on your own because maybe it's not appropriate. But when you write a prescription in blank and say anybody who comes in your pharmacy can get a shot under this prescription, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So why are you aware of that? And if not, is that something that you would look into to see if it should be changed? Because it seems that the only one benefiting is the doctor who gets paid to write this blank prescription, and not the people who will get the flu shot or the pharmacies who in many cases are not making money on some of this stuff. So I'd like you to address that.
No, I would. It's it's interesting because the agreements with overseeing physicians is not uncommon when you think about the way that nurse practitioners have worked in the past, and physicians' assistants, and the way that their different business models are set up with overseeing physicians. That's not a very uncommon thing. You want quality access, and access is really key. So especially in a Senate district like mine that is very rural, you might not have access to that overseeing physician all the time. But I think, as you point out, this is a very careful. This is an area that we have to tread very carefully in, because that physician oversight is very important. So
but
if they're
there isn't
totally
any oversight,
detached,
Mark. The problem is there's no oversight. They just write a blank prescription and walk away, and they never go back again.
Well,
so it's just a payment to satisfy a state regulation that appears to have no purpose and benefit no one. It doesn't benefit the patient. If I walk in to get a flu shot, and the pharmacy says, well, we don't have a prescription, so I go to the next one. Yeah, we have a standing prescription for anybody who walks in the door,
right? Because
we've paid our physician. And a lot of the places you represent are not big communities, and this expense is a lot for them. And they want to be able to have their constituents, your constituents, have access to the flu shot without having to pay this expense. Were you aware of this? And if not, would you look into it?
Yeah, I'll look into it.
Is it
Absolutely.
something you find it as offensive as we seem to?
Maybe not at the same level that you do. I think that
very offended.
Yeah, I think you have to worry about the mission creep there, though. And there's a reason that some things should be overseen, but especially if it's just running a racket, those are things that you have to pay attention to. So I'm glad that you brought it up,
Senator. And just to go back to my first question I asked you, as one of our listeners, I think you might have been distracted from finishing your answer there. But my first question was, in the broader district, aside from the bigger issues, what are the local issues that you've identified in those communities are really are a big focus for you, are being brought to your attention? Because I think the listener was listening and they thought it was a good question, but you never said what those local issues are. You said direct it more toward local control and let them be able to deal with their local issues. But what have you identified in your district are some of the unique, specific issues that really stand out?
Thanks for following up. Yeah, some of the unique issues in this district are rural broadband, cell phone access. There's still a good portion of my district that doesn't even have access to cell phone coverage or to high-speed broadband, which we realized in the years of the pandemic. This is an issue for everybody, especially students when they were sent home. Really incredible how failed some of the broadband policies have been. A ton of money was thrown on the table, especially during the Cuomo administration, to get this done. And when you look at the coverage maps, they'll say everybody's covered. But then if you look at a real honest number, you can see how many New Yorkers aren't covered. A lot of them are in my district. But the issues could be very localized. I just got a couple of bills that the governor signed into law that were for the Ilion Police Department. They had a couple that they needed civil service exemption for the age that they were entering the department. These guys are still definitely good to go, but they needed a special law done in Albany in order to make them eligible to serve on the police force in Ilion. So sometimes it's just those really hyper and very specific local issues.
Senator, we're running out of time, but I think just along those lines, and something that you've had to deal with, but solar issues. So, and you had an incident in one of the counties, I think, that you represent, but solar's been a big issue here as far as the state and their involvement, I guess, if you will, and their say on, when these projects are of a certain size, the say that they have on the communities, right?
All right, now you got to restart the clock for the whole interview, because I can talk about energy policy all day. I'm on the Energy Committee. Right. It is one of the most exciting areas, and mostly in a bad way, of public policy right now in the state of New York. The batteries that they're installing as a complement to these solar fields are dangerous. They're unproven technology. They're slapping them together. They're doing so in compliance with New York's Green New Deal, or the CLCPA that was passed, and some of the targets that we have, which are unreasonable and unrealistic. But when you have those targets and then you throw a bunch of money on the table, this is what you end up with. You end up with dangerous, unproven technology. So far, 15 New Yorkers have died as a result of battery fires just this year.
Yeah, and I think, as I mentioned,
from the solar batteries.
There's an e-bike facility in New York City that burnt a building down. But I mean, lithium-ion batteries need to be treated as a dangerous thing, and they are.
And the concern of what was burning off in Jefferson County, and any concern of toxins or anything of that nature, that's another concern, right? If there are fires.
Sure.
Right?
So, and I happen to represent a very rural area, and at least as far as we can tell so far, no health checkup has even been done on the volunteer firefighters that showed up on scene. But at least as far as we can tell so far, doesn't look like there was a great danger to the village of Chameau or to the residents of the town of Lyme, because there's enough rural space between the solar field that was exploding and caught fire. But these gases are odorless, tasteless, have no color, so you don't even know whether you've been exposed until you have some results. And
Senator, not to cut you off, I think as you pointed out, this could be its own conversation, just in itself. So I think it's a great opportunity, great introduction to have you in, and you're more than welcome anytime. I think we should start to do this on a regular basis. Great job, and there are plenty of other topics that we didn't touch on that I'm sure you have thoughts on, right, Senator?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I'm sure you do. Senator Mark Walczyk in studio with us, representing the 49th Senate District, as he mentioned, and most of Herkimer County. I know you have Lewis County and Hamilton County. I'm sure we have some listeners out there as well. So it's certainly covering a portion of our listening area. But Senator, great to meet you. As I mentioned, more than welcome to come back anytime. All right?
Great questions. Thanks for having me on,
Nice
gentlemen.
meeting you.
Thank you.